Donald Trump's lawyers argued in their appeal, quote, substantively, the terms engage and insurrection are unclear and subject to wildly varying standards. January 6th was, quote, not an insurrection, and President Trump in no way engaged in insurrection. Congressman, as a constitutional law professor and also someone who was at the Capitol, how do you understand Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? Did Donald Trump engage in insurrection?
Absolutely, he did. If it were just a mere riot, Donald Trump would not have gotten the Women for America First to change the permit for their protest from January 20th, where they were planning to protest at President Biden's inauguration, to January 6th. He told them it wasn't over yet. He was the one who, for the first time in American history, went out as a president and galvanized protest at the peaceful transfer of power at exactly that time at 1 p.m. So it's very hard to see this as a rally that got out of hand, just a mere riot, the kind of thing that happens every now and then. It was targeted for a very strategic political purpose at Congress, at the peaceful transfer of power. At the same moment, Donald Trump had been working for months and weeks either to get Electoral College votes flipped at the state level or to get the Department of Justice to intervene to turn the election, or to get Vice President Mike Pence to step outside of his constitutional role and simply declare Donald Trump the winner. Does that sound like a rally that got out of hand to you? No. On the contrary to what Chairman Comer said, the January 6th bipartisan hearings proved decisively that this was not some kind of happenstance riot. It was a designed political coup, an insurrection to overturn the election, and Donald Trump was the mastermind of the entire thing.
So do you have any faith that this Supreme Court will see it that way?
Well, you got to hope so. I mean, you know, these are the only federal jurists in the land who are blessed with the title of justice. They're not called just judge or your honor. They're called justice, which means they've got a calling to history here. And now is the real moment of reckoning and truth for these justices. And obviously, they have acted somewhat like partisan servants in the past towards the Republican Party platform. They overturned more than a half century of precedent to abolish the women's right to choose in Roe versus Wade. They overturned affirmative action. And so they have definitely followed some partisan marching orders. But now is their moment really to rise to the occasion and to show that they can act like real justices of the United States Supreme Court. And it shouldn't be difficult because the language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is perfectly clear and unambiguous. The original purposes are completely clear. You know, when the radical Republicans who added this to the Constitution in the 19th century first started over on the House side, it was far broader. They wanted to disenfranchise for life anybody who'd participated in insurrection or rebellion. And when it got over to the Senate, they said that's far too broad. We want to zero in on the most culpable offenders, the people who were actually public officials at the time who'd sworn an oath to support the Constitution, but then violated the oath by engaging in secession and sedition and rebellion. And even then, we won't disenfranchise them. Somebody like Jefferson Davis or Donald Trump can still vote. It's just they can never be trusted with public office again, which makes a lot of sense. And it's very clear in the four corners of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment what they meant. So the basic question the justices have to answer is, do we actually believe in constitutionalism? Are we going to follow the Constitution, which is a basic precept of our democracy?
Congressman, I want to get your reaction to something. Let me play for you what Donald Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, said on Fox. Listen to this.
I think it should be a slam dunk in the Supreme Court. I have faith in them. You know, people like Kavanaugh, who the president fought for, who the president went through hell to get into place. He'll step up. Those people will step up.
Congressman, what do you make of those comments?
Well, this is the way that New York mobsters think about judges. Yeah, we own that one. We own that one. Get in that court. That guy's in our pocket. And for fascist and authoritarian parties and movements, the law is really not what you know, but it's who you know. And it's always better for them to know the judge than to know the law. But to know the law here is to understand that Donald Trump is disqualified. And there's nothing undemocratic about it, which is what I keep hearing from, the far precincts of the right. It's no more undemocratic than saying you've got to be 35 years old to be president, which means there are a lot of qualified Democrats and Republicans and independents who simply can't run because they're not qualified under the Constitution, just like a lot of people who were born abroad don't meet the native birth qualification. Jennifer Granholm, born in Canada, can't be president. Arnold Schwarzenegger, born in Austria, can't be president. There are millions of people disqualified that way. Donald Trump is in a tiny group of fewer than a dozen people, probably, who have disqualified themselves by engaging in insurrection or rebellion. You could view this as the most defensible category of disqualification for being president because you choose to be in it, unlike someone who's born abroad or happens to be just in their 20s, like my colleague Maxwell Frost, who might make a great president, but he's constitutionally disqualified the same way that Donald Trump is.
Let me get you on one more thing before I have to let you go. Trump's lawyers and even some of his supporters say Section 3 of the 14th Amendment shouldn't apply to him because it doesn't specifically say the office of president of the United States or the president of the United States. But it does say in Section 3 or any officer of the United States. You're the constitutional law scholar. I am not. But my reading of that is any officer of the United States would include the president of the United States. No?
You can go all the way through the Constitution and find lots of places where the president and the presidency are referred to as officers or officials or offices. In fact, the president of the United States swears an oath to uphold the office of the presidency. So it's very clear. I mean, that one is not even a serious issue. They're throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall in order to deny the very clear meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But, even Jefferson Davis, who was put on trial in Virginia for treason, said, yeah, of course he was disqualified for being president for his participation in the secession, in the insurrection and rebellion. He used that to assert that to try him for treason would be double jeopardy, which was ridiculous argument. But the whole premise of the argument was, of course, he was disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That's a contemporaneous construction by a guy who had every reason to say that it wasn't true. But everybody has always understood that the presidency is, of course, covered that way. It would be ridiculous to say that anybody can be disqualified who's in federal office for participating in insurrection or rebellion, except for the person who is best positioned to make the insurrection or rebellion work, as we saw with Donald Trump, who was pulling all of the strings on that day, and to this day refuses to renounce or denounce the insurrection. On the contrary, he's crisscrossing the country, promising to pardon more than 900 people who've been convicted of seditious conspiracy, assaulting federal officers, destroying federal property, interfering with the federal proceeding, and so on.
And he's actually calling them, the folks who are in jail over the insurrection, calling them hostages. Congressman Raskin, I want to thank you for being here. And I also want to remind people that they should read your book, Unthinkable, because you, in that book, show as a lie Congressman Comer's assertion that January 6th was a rally gone bad. Congressman Raskin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Jonathan, thank you for having me.